Hi friends. Been enjoying so much talking with everyone this week about the landscape of our mind. This week I've been sharing that it is challenging for all of us to deal with this constantly busy, constantly negative, and constantly changing landscape of thoughts in the mind. So this week I've been trying to kind of share with you this idea of what if instead of beating ourselves up mentally, we started to look at our mind like it was a garden. We kind of stood back and just observed the landscape. And then over time, we could start to realize that every garden has weeds. These were representing this week negative thoughts. And every garden has flowers, the positive thoughts that we all do have deep down. And to try to slowly over time realize that we are within ourselves a very skilled landscaper. My husband and I, we bought our first home several years ago, and it was this tiny, cute little Cape Cod, and it had this sweet little plot of land. And the person that owned the home before us, they planted the most ridiculous amount of flower beds for the size of the yard that it was. And it was one of the things that charmed us about the house. There was all sorts of hummingbirds and butterflies that just flew around constantly. It was very magical, and it was something that we loved. But then once we purchased the home, the first couple of weekends of home ownership, it was a really overwhelming landscape. We found ourselves standing back being like, oh my God, what have we gotten ourselves into? And so at first we just kind of had to realize, all right, well, this is what it is, right? We have to let this be. This is what's on our plate. And so eventually we started to get invested in how we can start to landscape this garden. We knew nothing, as many of us do when we first sit down to begin a meditation practice. We know nothing about how to pilot this insanely busy mind. So if we think of it as a garden, we can start to figure out how to acquire the tools. So we went weekend after weekend to Home Depot, and we started to acquire every possible tool needed to landscape this yard. And over time, we slowly started to manage the weeds. And so these weeds are like negative thoughts in our mind. And we all have them. Some of us have really, really easy surface weeds. There would be weeds sometimes where all I had to do was barely touch it and the thing would just fall out and weed itself, basically. It just needed the light of awareness was simply it. Then there were some weeds in the garden that weekend after weekend were my arch nemesis. I would literally go in there with my feet and hands and try to pull this weed out. It would beat me up every time. Some weekends I would walk away crying. This thing would be challenging to get out, so I would just walk away defeated, not able at the time to pull that weed out. So slowly going around and picking out the negative thoughts or the smaller weeds the best that we can when we first start to try to work with our mind. Over time, you start to gain a sense of confidence. So we were talking this week about the negative thoughts, the weeds, and that once we spend enough time just letting it be and observing the landscape, we realize, okay, these little weeds, I have to let them go. These negative thoughts, I have to slowly see if I can let them go. At first, the negative thoughts are things like, the simple ones are like, oh, I can't meditate, I suck at this. Or, oh, I can't garden, what am I doing? I'm horrible. These are the small weeds we can pluck out. We will all inevitably have really deep-rooted weeds, the big bad boys that need shovels and jackhammers to get out. We all have them. Every garden does. And over time, as we tend to it and we start to pull out the smaller weeds, we start to gain a sense of confidence that, you know what, I can go after that really big, deeply rooted weed. And so more time spent just kind of landscaping the best we can. Every weekend, hubby and I would go out there and we would pull out weeds. And it would be a lot of work, and there'd be weekends where we would be like, God, why are we doing this? And if we ever let a weekend pass, if we said, you know what, give up, screw this, I'm not doing this work, it's hard, which it is for all of us to work with our mind, it's hard work. But we cannot simply sit and observe the weeds and expect them to pull themselves out. We can't observe stress and negative thoughts and just expect that observing them will remove them. We do ultimately have to be the landscaper. We have to work with our mind. And so over time, we do. First, we let it be. Then we start to slowly pluck out the weeds. Let go of the little things. I suck at gardening. I am not good at meditating. We slowly start to pull those ones out so that we've got the energy to deal with the deeper ones, the bigger ones. the ones of I'm not enough, these deeper, long-held, really sturdy root kind of weeds. But we do, just like we pluck out the little ones over time, we pull out the larger ones. So hubby and I did this for weekend after weekend, year after year, and eventually we started to get the hang of things. If we ever let a weekend go, if we, let's say, stopped doing the work of tending to the mind or tending to the garden, the next weekend it would be overgrown like you would not believe, proving that we need to put a little bit of work in every single day. Most mornings I started to figure out, okay, if I go outside with my tea and I just walk around and I pluck out a couple of small weeds, it makes the big task of accomplishing the really big ones a little bit easier when it comes time to deal with them. So eventually, it comes time to deal with the big weeds, but pulling out the small ones prepares us. And my hubby and I would do this work for weekend after weekend, and there would always be a point at the end of every extraordinarily long and sometimes really frustrating weekends of gardening. There would always be a point where we would step back at the end, exhausted, covered in dirt, surrounded by an obscene amount of trash bags filled with weeds for such a tiny little yard. And we would sit back, sweaty, exhausted. We would crack open a beer, and we would just observe the lush landscape. We would see the beauty. We would see the tilled soil, smell the abundance of the fresh cut grass, see the new buds forming the flowers that were starting to bloom. Yet there would be some weeds that we missed. There would still be some work that needed to be done, but we could begin to let it in. The beauty of this garden that sometimes frustrates us. And so these flowers, they're representing our positive thoughts, and over time, we can start to let those in. And we start to find the beauty. We start to feel the presence. We start to reap the benefits of all this hard work. So it's possible. It's possible to go from overwhelmed, having no freaking idea what you're doing, to acquiring every possible tool and finding out that you are a skilled landscaper. You just got to let it be. When the time feels right, you'll start to let it go. And the more you let it go, the more you'll start to see the beauty pop up, the positivity, the space, the goodness, the light that you are, and you'll work to let that in. So join me on Sunday. I'll put up a video and we'll do a guided meditation with this idea of tending to the mind as a garden, try to put the tools into action so we can continue to be a skilled landscaper and pilot this landscape of the mind. If you need anything, don't ever hesitate to reach out. You know I love you and I love to hear from you. Make sure that you subscribe so that you get the updates of whenever I post these fun little videos that I'm enjoying doing, and I'm appreciating your feedback and glad you're enjoying watching them. You can also find me on Facebook and on Instagram. It's JFK Yoga everywhere. And you can also go to my website, JFK Yoga, and find out when I'm doing special events and workshops, and come to my weekly classes if you're in the Maryland area. So until next time, with all my heart, I love you, you skilled landscapers. I'll see you on Sunday. Till next time, namaste.